All right. So this is a session that was done at the Vermont Vegetable Berry Growers Association meeting, and I'm new to this technology. So Michael Kilpatrick was kind enough to set this up so that we could go through some of the things with bed steaming, and there's also a bunch on soil solarization techniques. So, so my name is Andre Quintamo. I'm with Heron Pond Farm. We're in Southampton, New Hampshire. That's our longitude and latitude address. Um, our 10 hours of daylight happen, somewhere around the first week of February, about February 7th this year. So that gives you an idea of like, you know, comparison of day length of wherever you're at. Um, the talk, the main problem I was having in my tunnels was the chickweed. And I don't know if you can see my cursor, but you see these chickweeds over here and over here. And they would get started in our tunnels. And, this is easy enough just to rogue out with a hoe. However, it got to the point where, it just, well, you'll see as we progress through the slides, but basically chickweed just started to dominate more and more. It was harder and harder to control. So then you have a chickweed problem like this. This is from the Arnold's greenhouse and in Argyle, New York. And you can still see, obviously you're going to get this crop out of here, but the chickweed's getting more and more developed. It's harder to stay on top of even with hoeing, and it can be a real nightmare. And then, then it can come to the point where like you can't see the crop at all. This is from outside. This is over at Kilpatrick Family Farm, but you can. It's just an example of how deep a problem it can get. And for our greenhouses, we started winter farming, and we figured and it was easy. We never had weed problems. We never had any problems for years and years. And then once it started, in a matter of like 2 years, it turned into this. And this is one of our houses that, obviously this was Swiss chard. This was an idea we had to get rid of the chickweed at first, was to introduce all these chickens. It was the worst idea um, in the world. It was so bad. It created all kinds of hot spots in our house for tomatoes after, and it really and they didn't really get rid of the chickweed at all. They weren't helpful. So and you can see if you look at the chickens, you see all the chickweed and very little chard, and it's because they like the chard more than the chickweed anyway. And so they were just going after that. So I was invited to this frozen ground conference in 2014, and there's like some of the best winter growers around were there. And actually, I think I was invited because I'm mildly entertaining to hang out with. But there was a bunch of people who would definitely been at this longer than I. One of them is this guy, Elliot Coleman. Had a really amazing time hanging out with Elliot, and he introduced me to the idea of bed steaming. But he was also playing with the idea of like, let's talk about whether we're going to do bed steaming or we're going to do soil solarizations techniques. And so, Elliot's full of stories, and so he tells you, like back in 1942, they drove this steam machine to the greenhouses. They drove it under its own power and parked it right outside. They hooked up all the steam pipes, and they basically, you can see where these mats are over here, basically steam injecting the soil, and these tubes sterilizing the soil so that they can have weed-free and pathogen-free environment. So on Facebook, pardon me, on Facebook, a lot of people were talking about like, well, what about solarization? This pamphlet, edit it down here. You guys should take that information down. This is like the God pamphlet of this technique, as far as I'm concerned. Everything you need to know is in here, and it's from APS Press. And there is a lot of the slides coming forward are from this book, but you can see them doing the solar stuff inside and outside here. And so the theory behind this is pretty simple. You know, you have your soil, then you have your film that goes over the soil, and the sunlight just, you know, warms up the soil through the transparent plastic and gets you to a certain depth of 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 treatment. And you have to do this the same way for soil solarization as you have to do for bed steaming, is that you have to make your beds. So any kind of tilling you're going to do, whether it's going to be rototilling or broad forking or whatever, then if you're going to grade it out, like you're going to create your finished seed bed, because you're not going to want to disturb the soil after. It also has to be moist, and then you can lay down the plastic and let her rip. Um, a lot of us had gone to the conference in Manchester, New Hampshire, and met JM up there. He's doing a lot of amazing things with this process. He almost, I think, stale seedbeds, almost everything this way, and he was very forthcoming with a lot of his knowledge and how it works out for him. And he's made it pretty popular. And you can see, you just unroll these. He does it with these are silage tarps, which are relatively inexpensive to be able to do large swaths of soil solarization at a time. And but this is the main problem for soil solarization for me. And the main problem for me is that the if you look down at the bottom axis, this is weeks. And so you have all these pests here, and they all go down severely over weeks and near zero, as a matter of fact, at 9 weeks. But the problem is the time of year, the height of the sun, and the amount of time that it would take to get an effective control of chickweed inside my greenhouses, because I do not have mobile greenhouses. And I am trying to push as many tomatoes through those houses as I can. And so by keeping the tomatoes as late as I do and having my turnover date in mid-October, I only have a little bit of time to take care of these potential problems. So this is a guy who has a flower operation, and the great thing about having a guy with a flower operation is they steam their beds at a different time than you do. And what you'll do is, I basically share this steamer with this guy now, and pretty much has bought him out of it. But, this is Yuda. He runs Bluebell Greenhouses up in Lee, New Hampshire, and he was gracious enough to introduce me to steaming. And this is the steamer. You can get these from Sue. This is a 500,000 BTU low pressure steam unit. But it's quite large because you have to produce a lot of steam even though it's at low pressure. So the basics of steaming are, you need a tarp, a heat tube, a tarp over it, and some kind of weights for the side. This particular picture has a vacuum set up so that you would be actually creating negative pressure under the tarp to quickly induce the steam. But I don't use a vacuum. I just have the steam going regularly. And this is what we're shooting for. So I shoot for 180 degrees. And at 180 degrees, you can see that most weeds and all pathogenic bacteria and most plant viruses are all gone. And you'll see that, like, lower down, a lot of other of the pathogens are gone. And so by going after chickweed, I really am taking care of a lot of things. Now, what I do is I'm only sterilizing the top 2 inches of soil. So I'm paying careful attention to the fact that I'm only getting to 180 degrees within that top 2 inches. And then I'm letting, and then I move the unit so that I'm not heat treating the soil column all the way down. This allows for a reintroduction of beneficial soil microbes from underneath the zone that I'll be steaming in. So here we are in that very greenhouse that you saw all the chickweed in, and we laid out all of our beds and we rolled them all flat. And you can see I'm not big into tillage, so there's like a lot of kind of residue trash on here that's not going to really affect anything. But I roll things flat for very good steaming and very good contact with the with the cedar later. And then we hook up our steamer, and this that black tube coming out of the top right there is is where the steam's going to be coming out of, and it is introduced to a lay flat tube here, and you can see there's a little grommet, and that's a close up of the grommet. And then you put this thing grommet size down in the middle of your bed, and this is a 4 foot wide tarp that's put on top. And I weigh it down with whatever I have. And this shows a little bit of like how the steaming works. And you can see I'm losing a little bit of steam there, but that's how quiet it is. Just steams away. And then the one thing you have to be careful of is when you pull this thing off, if your face is over here, it's steam. It'll burn you. But we just hop over from one side to the next. And then we seed with whatever seeder you have, and this is the plant stands that we start to acquire. And no weeding is done at all, no soil disturbance at all to this. And then this is right before we're going to harvest. And again, there hasn't been any weeding to this at all. It's just the way that it grows. And so we've gone from a situation where it used to look like this to where we're having yields like this. And this is the same house, same time of year, and the difference in what the conditions would have been. So the cost of steaming is really dependent on fuel costs. So here we have it set at a $2 a gallon rate, although it was quite low, much lower than the $2 a gallon rate there. And then we moved, so I did cost it out also at $4 a gallon, which it has been. So it would have been, $3.92 if it was $4 a gallon. And so when you look at the total cost of steaming, it's between $400 and $600 for a 30 by 96 house. And when you consider the fact that I've gone from, unusable to, yields, it's good. But even if you don't consider it being completely unusable, you can look at some of these yields. This is a half of, we generally harvest half of a house at a time. We run 7 30 by 96 houses in the winter. So we harvest them half a house at a time. These are some of the yields for some of the different varieties that we were doing at the time. And so that you can see that our first cuts, the difference between our first cuts to our third cuts is huge. I mean, we just have not perfected how much drop off we get. But our total yields this year got us out of a single 30 by 96, 17,675. This is admittedly high. I think this has to deal with the fact that it's such a mild winter, and the production was up. But high 15s and into 16 is about what I would expect. I will definitely take the higher yields if I can get them. And then, here's my contact information. If you have any other questions, you can just email me there. I don't answer my phone when I can't recognize the number very much, but I will probably respond to email. And I think that's all I got there.
Yeah, Andre, I'm just going to jump in here.
Yeah, because that would be good, because I'm trying to figure out how to get back to the screen where I can talk to people.
So if anyone has any questions, if you just want to type them into the question and answer area, feel free, and we'll go ahead and we will go ahead and get those answered. And again, apologize for not starting on time and not being here, Andre. It's you posted on Facebook like I need to set myself a reminder, and Michael was the one who needed the reminder. He got out of his truck and left his phone in there. So someone's asking for more details on the steamer. Andre, do you want to talk a little bit more about the steamer and how that works?
Yeah, so it's a 500,000 BTU steamer. It's not something that you can farmer rig at all. You really need to have, you know, a low pressure steamer. You can't just use a boiler to do it. And the reason is that the boiler chamber is too small to be able to produce enough steam at the lower pressure once you take that out. So you need a unit like this. Sue is probably the most popular company. The steamer that I showed you is quite expensive. It's about $30,000. However, you can get them used. I know that if Pete Johnson from Pete's Greens in Craftsbury, Vermont, just picked one up for under $3,000 and probably put about $500 immediately into it. But you can that unit that I had was 30 years old. It needed a complete rebuild in the water jacket, so we had to cut it in half at the boiler shop. So we put about $3,700 in it. So even if you buy one for a couple thousand and have to do a complete rebuild, you're only looking at under 6,000 of a unit like that. So.
And I think, Andre, the cost value of that, of not having the weed and the increased yields you get, easily would recoup that, even with a couple greenhouses.
And the cost of steaming slide back there included the depreciation cost of buying a steamer new. So even if you spent the 30,000, that cost per greenhouse was actually using the depreciated hour value of your unit. So so that's how much it would cost, including the cost of the unit.
Cool.
And I see there's another question about the material used to cover the soil. Well, Sue will be glad to sell you a official cover that comes in different sizes. Usually the 4-foot size is the more convenient size to use. And you can get 100-foot, 4-foot thing and 100 feet of that steamer hose for about $500 from them. It's nice to have that particular material because of you'll notice when you try to use other types of tarps and things, they don't hold the heat down as well. They're not made as woven and tough. And they also cling to the soil when you try to move it from one bed to the next. Like you can literally just pick this thing up and move it and nothing seems to stick to it. So it's worth the $250 for the soil cover. It's not a good soil cover to use solarization with. You need you need either black, or you either have to go black or you have to go clear. This stuff is not is usually kind of like an opaque material that doesn't, you know, really hold in a lot. You know, it doesn't have that same effect as like a black plastic would on the ground.
And Carol was asking where one can rent a steamer, and I don't think I think you just have to look around, Andre. Did you have any luck with renting one besides obviously the flower farmer that had one?
I I think the most notably you'll find that that a lot of guys doing flowers will have them.
Okay.
It's actually, once you started looking around at flower growers, it's like old hat to them, and they're mainly because they're looking at pathogens. They're not looking at as much at um they're not looking as much at weeds. I don't know why. Maybe they just don't have the same weed problems that we do, but it's a lot more delicate to grow some of the flowers that they're growing. So you'll find them out there.
Yeah.
How long is the bed steamed for? The bed is steamed for it's at depth. So basically, my soils are a little heavier. So my soil is a little heavier, so it takes a little longer. When I go into a sandier soil, it's shorter. So the heavier, the longer. And so our sections are done for 2 hours and 20 minutes a section. And so that's 4 foot by 100. And it takes 2 hours, and that's 180 degrees to 2 inches of soil depth. How big an area can be steamed at once? The How big an area? Okay, well, that depends on the size. Like, it depends on the size of your steamer and and the length that you want to steam. So, um, we used to do this in 48 feet sections because that was the size tarp that the flower grower had. But then come to find out the 500,000 BTU unit would do 100. Um, you have you have like Pete has a 650,000 BTU. So it would just take shorter period of time depending on how many BTUs that you can throw at it. So and then yeah, so that's that. Say how many times can you steam the beds in a year? Um, I guess you could steam them as much as you wanted to in a year. You don't. We do it once in the fall, and it takes us all the way through the spring. And then we break up the ground in the spring and put our tomatoes in, and we don't re-steam, and it's fine. But it's not fine the next year, next winter. So we do it once a year. But I guess you could do it as many times as you're willing to invest into that time. Um, how big of an How do you get a soil thermometer under the tarp, and it's cut off, but something? I can't read it.
Let me
Michael, can you read
see.
the end of that?
But readable. So I think you're just like pulling the tarp. Are you pulling the tarp back and putting the soil thermometer there and just testing it, or do you just know how long it takes?
Well, now I know how long it takes, but I often just before I before I shut the whole operation down, I pull back the tarp, I shove the thermometer in, I have a little stop on it at 2 inches,
Yep.
and the probe is at the bottom, and then it shoots up. And when it shoots up to like 180 degrees, then I pull it out. But you would have had to do that before because you're supposed to hold it at 180 degrees for like 20 minutes. But I know it takes about 2 hours to get there. And so I usually just go 2 hours and 20 minutes. And if I check the soil temp, I'm really only seeing that it did get to 180 degrees, but it might not have gotten to for that whole time. But interestingly enough, the interesting thing about how sensitive these temperatures are, if you recall the slide where you saw the weights that were holding down the edges of the tarp, if you recall where that slide was, that those weights, when in the middle of the winter, you'll pull off those where those weights were, and that's where weeds will grow because the heat never got underneath exactly where the weights were sitting. I
All right. I think that.
Okay, there's only. Oh, is this you asking about the 6 millimeter plastic?
No, that was someone else. Yeah.
Six millimeter plastic, 6 mil plastic I use for when I do my stale seed bedding and by sun.
Yeah.
The tarp is thicker than 6 mil that goes down. How are you only steaming the top 2 inches of soil? This experience, I'm actually steaming below the top 2 inches of soil. But what I'm doing is only getting to temperature at 2 inches of depth through experience. And then, I mean, that was like, the first time I did it, I just kept checking, 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 checking. And I did that a lot for um, the first few, first few times I did it, I guess.
All right. And then the last question is they're only using one hose to spread the steam over the bed.
Oh, why do we only need one hose?
Yeah. I think that was the question.
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, I guess I had thoughts like, well, how is this actually going to work? But boy, I mean, it's plenty of steam under there. The whole thing, billows up. The whole tarp billows up. It produces a lot of steam in there, and so it just keeps the idea is just to warm up that soil.
And then Carol had a great question. Is there any downsides? Any, decrease in soil life or anything like that? I know that's something some people were discussing when we were talking about steaming, when you were first thinking about it, Andre.
Yeah, definitely. It came up at the conference
Yeah.
you and I were at. I mean, that was a big deal. And I think it was Pete who convinced me because he had done so much work over in Norway. Um, and so many of the organic guys over there are steaming all of their soils, and they're on a 2-year rotation now. They don't have to steam every year. They only steam every 2 years because they've gotten all their weed seeds and pathogens down that far. But the data show if you have good soil biota, which is measured now, Cornell has a actual biological index soil test, which is awesome. And I'm part of the I was part of the beta project. Michael, do you know if they're doing that now and selling them or?
I don't. I haven't heard. And that's something I would actually be very interested in to work on that.
Yeah. So I mean, call Cornell. I mean, it was something that I was on a pilot project with for building better soils. Um, and they have an indice for biological activity in your soil, and you can perform these tests before and after. And of course, if you perform it right after, you can do it as a matter of time. And they have logarithmic scales of how fast it happens. But the reintroduction of all the if you generally have a good population of soil biota and a good balance between the pathogens in the first place, then you're not going to have a problem. If you have very poor soil biology, you could really have the same problem that you do by spraying a general insecticide on something, like using Entrust or Pyganic on something, and you find out that you have twice the pests later because you just killed all of the beneficials too. So um, you really are counting on your own soil biology coming back and reinfecting the area. And it's found that there's a sweet spot for organic matter for this too. So you don't want these organic matters that end up in greenhouses. Mike Collins and I were actually just talking about this. Like, organic matter in some of our greenhouses, because we treat it like a sandbox because we're there all the time. I mean, they kick it up to like 15% or something. And like, that's just too much organic matter. But if you have no organic matter, down 3% or below 5%, that's not really good either. So the sweet spot, I would say, would be above 5% organic matter, because it really aids in the whole process of both the reinfection of the biota and um, the equalness and the evenness of getting the proper temperature at the proper depth across the entire length of your greenhouse.
Absolutely. All right. Cool. Well, I think that was all the questions we had. And just again, this was Johnny's was very gracious to sponsor this webinar by paying for the software used for this. We want to thank them for that again. And any final questions? And if not, we will go ahead and end the webinar. So again, thanks for coming, and again, thanks for putting up with us getting started late. And thanks to Andre for putting together all this information and being the brave one and actually going and doing it. So I know there's so many ideas us farmers talk about, but sometimes we don't actually go ahead and get them done. So again, thanks to Andre for being brave and doing this. So, all right, thanks everyone so much, and you all have a good evening. And we will try to get the replay up within the next 24 to 48 hours. I'll try to get that either up tonight or tomorrow sometime. So, all right, I'm going to go ahead and end the meeting. Thank you very much for coming.
Thanks, Michael.